Judy Liddell. Judy Liddell.
Well, farming looking good right now, crops, huh?
Have the county
One day they
organization
were
minutes,
all
okay,
high, and
yes.
the next day they just grow a foot.
Okay,
We got an inch last night.
thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Connect to where?
All right, where am I?
Oh, wow. My mom,
Oh, we're good.
she's got me down to it. I look at this, so you
No.
I've got
gotta
faith in you,
fill out
Okay.
and if
Put
you're
it
not dead,
in.
slap us and tell us we're straight.
No.
and then you can,
And then this year, this election so far, you don't.
Why?
Why is this not?
Oh, no. I got 4 of them. We're good.
Or this is, I think it might open.
can an 18-year-old witness his mom or grandma? Or vice versa?
Commissioners, please stand and join us in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Morning, everybody.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning, ladies.
Approval of board minutes.
So moved.
Motion made by Commissioner Jelinski,
Second.
second by Commissioner Wilson to approve the board minutes. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Additions or deletions? Beth? Commissioners?
Make a motion to accept the agenda as presented.
Motion made by Commissioner Wilson,
Second.
second by Commissioner Blaine. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. First on the agenda today is Oasis, Central Minnesota. Welcome.
Hopefully you can read it there with, on the screen.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
So I'm happy to be here this morning to just give you a little bit of information on what Oasis does and is doing and sort of our plans for the future. I'm sure many of you have heard of our organization before. We've been around since 1989. Primarily doing the Share a Meal program, and that's where most people have heard of us. That program serves more than 3,000 meals each year in our community, and that's a volunteer program. Today I'm going to talk more about our emergency housing program. We've seen, I was just talking to Steph from Hands of Hope, we've just seen a huge increase this month with people needing our services. Since 2017, we've served 345 households that have needed housing assistance. That included 421 adults. Lost their housing due to income changes, family situation changes. Sometimes it's a domestic violence situation that leads to the people losing their housing. Most common, people are sleeping on couches. I think that's about 40% is what I have. 28% are ending up sleeping outdoors. We have some people in vehicles, and then some people that came directly to us from some of those other circumstances. I did want to talk a little bit with the sleeping on couches, how vulnerable people are, especially when they have children and they're going home with, you know, who that person is they may not know very well. They're highly susceptible to being taken advantage of in a lot of different ways. So though that seems like shelter, it can be an extremely vulnerable and exploitative environment. Let's see, I have some notes here. So as you can see from those numbers, I did some statistics about sort of these are people from our community and these are people that want to stay here. Right around a third of those adults that have a housing insecurity or homeless experience are employed. So keeping them here in our community where they can retain employment is really important. It's also important for families with children if their kids are in school. Often that's the stability that they have for meals, support from teachers and other school staff is also really important. The largest barriers I see to not being employed are probably daycare and transportation. Last year, 88% of those that we served, and that is often providing them with a motel stay and then working with our staff to get connected to resources, find out what sort of housing is appropriate. Is it income-based housing? Is it fair market housing? Sometimes it's like a group housing option. But 88% of those that we served were able to get into some sort of stable housing that was appropriate for them. And we had some open carryover. So we have a pretty high success rate of getting people once we can give them shelter, and they can feel stable and secure and connect to resources. The most often they can find housing and sort of transition to productivity and stability. Last year, and this is sort of common from year to year, just because of funding and some other, often the hotels are full because we do house people in the hotel without a building. Only about half of those that requested shelter in Morrison County were able to get that motel stay. So half of the people that needed it because they were in a car, they were outdoors, they were living with a friend or family member, half of those folks we were able to maybe help them connect to resources, but we couldn't give them that safety of a safe bed to sleep at night, which is difficult. Let's see. I also just sort of wanted to touch on, we're in with the COVID-19 situation. A lot of this has accelerated and increased. We've seen people that, are unsure about employment. They're stressed due to the sort of stay at home and a lot of mental health crisis. Domestic violence situations are sort of accelerating. So we've seen an increase in cases. It's also important when you're talking about the virus to have people to have shelter, because if they don't, they're congregating in sort of communal areas. They're walking through stores, gas stations, they're sleeping in public areas, so they have a higher rate of sort of passing on the virus, as well as overburdening our emergency rooms. Let's see, I have some statewide statistics because I think it's important when we talk about this that this isn't just a Morrison County issue, this is something that's happening all over the state of Minnesota. these are statistics from the Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless. 80 of Minnesota's 87 counties report that they do not have enough emergency shelter beds in their community, which is pretty startling. There's a lot of sort of activity and there's a lot of organizations that are working to sort of get projects. There's 55 projects throughout Minnesota that are sort of waiting to get capital funding. We're sort of included in that because our goal would be to have a sort of facility where we could more easily, more efficiently and effectively house people. And we've done a lot of work with going around the state and looking at what different models are, especially throughout greater rural Minnesota, what things look like, and there's a variety of models. Some are apartment buildings, some are churches that are renovated, so there's a lot of variety of what can be done. I think the key is that there are on-site services for people. It needs to be more than just that four walls and a roof. You need to provide people with support and resources to try and help them transition. I did include this. There's some state legislation that is sort of pending to potentially provide that capital support. We're kind of at the end of that sort of, we're at the end of that at this point. There's been some special sessions, but things are sort of wrapping up, it seems like, at the state level. But the hope is long-term that there can be some more state support to provide funding for capital and operations. Let's see, what else can I say? Oh, I could say, just touching on that statewide issue, last year we had calls from 14 other counties. That's not included in our 300 households. 14 other counties from either social service workers or people themselves that needed housing and assistance. The furthest away, I think I had a social worker call from Pipestone, Minnesota, that wanted to, she felt that we were the closest option for her, and that person didn't come here. But it just shows sort of the need statewide. Trying to think of what else I can say. I guess I appreciate being here because I feel like this is an issue that not one entity, not the state of Minnesota, not, one sort of piece can be, it takes a lot of different people coming together and a lot of different entities. It's gonna take the state of Minnesota, it's gonna take a local organization here. And of course, the faith communities are also involved to come together and sort of everybody do their parts and sort of work to end homelessness here. I guess, are there any questions?
Thank you. Commissioners?
Mr.
Commissioner Blaine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your name for the record?
Oh, sure, it's Rose Surma, thank you.
Thank you, Rose. If I may ask you a question,
Sure.
Ms. Surma, you had mentioned in your comments that there was a percentage of what we look at as homeless that are employed. From that statement, do we deduce then that we do not have enough apartments or housing availability within the community, within the county for those, or is it that there is a disconnect between working wages and affordable housing? Can you put that into
Yep.
perspective for us?
Sure, so the last, City of Little Falls did a housing study in 2011. It would be nice if we had a more recent one, but at that time, the housing wage, which is the hourly wage you would need to make working 40 hours a week to afford a fair market apartment, I think they did a 2-bedroom apartment, was $15 an hour. So there are some folks, you know, if you're a 2-adult household and you're both working, you may get to that level. If you're a single parent with maybe working at McDonald's, you're likely not gonna be making that $15 an hour. So there's sort of a gap there, but there are, you know, income-based housing options. So many of our folks sort of need to, that's the program that will best fit them. Those programs all have waiting lists, months. I mean, people can wait 90 days for an opening for income-based programs. So that is something it definitely would be, from my perspective, nice to have more options available for that. You also, it gets a little complicated because you can run into people having some barriers if they have evictions or a criminal background, you know, income-based housing may not be an option. Then you're looking at how do we increase your income so you can afford something fair market, or maybe there's a group housing option available to you. But I don't know if that answers it for you. There is it's sort of a both and there.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Commissioner Jelinski?
Mr. Chair, if I may. Rose, good morning again. And this isn't the first time that you have appeared before this board, and I appreciate you coming every time that you do. And you always startle me with numbers. And it is. If I'm understanding this right, at any given point in time, we've got 1.5 adults per day that do not have a place to live. Am I correct?
That could be, I would say yes.
Well, if we have 421 adults in 2017,
That was from to the present, about 100 in a year.
excuse me.
Yep,
Thank
100
you.
households. That doesn't include, so a household could be anywhere from 1 to 6 people.
Okay.
So those are households. Trying to think, I should have put on here, I didn't bring. But I think we're over 100 households just in 2020 at this point in time
That are homeless.
that are without housing, yeah.
So, and that
That
is,
have been without housing.
and that is in Morrison County.
In Morrison County, just with these numbers and with our small organization, we don't have the capacity to serve Crow Wing, Todd, all these other counties. We do get calls from them, but we primarily serve Morrison County, and part of the requirement is that they want to stay here. I don't have resources in other counties, so if they want to be in St. Cloud, we would connect them with a St. Cloud resource so that they could go there, have those resources there. The people that we work with are in Morrison County, then they want to stay, they have a connection to stay in Morrison County.
To follow that up, if I may, Mr. Chair, is that this is an issue, obviously, and you're bringing that forth, but this is such a trickle-down issue. It's a trickle-down, because I'm not suggesting for 1 second that these are bad people, good people, white, black, blue, it doesn't make any difference to me. They're
Yep.
people.
Yep.
That there is a trickle-down effect, whether that is domestic violence, whether that is theft. I'm anticipating if they're homeless that their stomach is probably empty once in a while also. So it is a big community, state, federal issue. I don't have the answer, of course, for you. You've got many answers, I'm confident of that, but we don't have the wherewithal to
Yep.
fill those gaps, and I'm clear on that. But it's just enlightening or baffling to me that those numbers are right here in this community. And when I speak of this community, I'm speaking of all of Morrison County. I'm not picking on Little Falls, I'm not picking on Bolus, I'm picking on Morrison County. It baffles me that we have that number. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Rose.
Commissioner Wincher.
Good morning, Rose. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question I have, and you kind of mentioned that if these homeless, do they have to have some identification that shows that they are from Morrison County? It's not where we have people from Benton come here. Is that appropriate? And then another thing is, when you say hotel stays, are we looking for, it's not permanent, but semi-permanent places for these people to stay, if that's the correct word? And then, does the hotel volunteer their room, or do they get paid? There's a couple of questions there.
Sure, that's a good question. So at this point, we just have an office building here. So we utilize the hotels and we pay the hotels. So we pay, last year we paid over $30,000 in a year for hotel stays. This year we're gonna be far above that. So that's what we've utilized. That's where we are hoping to build sort of both operational funds as well as some capital where we can have a building, and that's gonna be more efficient. International Falls has a really nice model where they have a sort of, it's a large house that is a multifamily house with different, each floor is sort of, one's for singles, then they have family units up. So there's a lot of different models, but something like that would be much more efficient than paying $30,000 plus a year for hotels. So that's what we're utilizing. As far as verifying residency, there's, a variety of ways that we sort of do that. One would be like an identification card, like a Minnesota ID or some other sort of form of ID. Often people are connected and have an active open social service case here. And so then that sort of does at least our work for us, where social services has verified, yes, this person is in Morrison County and is eligible for sort of services here. So that's often where sort of the verification comes in. But we do want to verify, yes, that you are here. I always tell people when they call from outside, don't come here. There isn't anything extra for you here. You need to connect with resources where you're at. That's going to be what's best for you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Rose.
Commissioner Zelinski.
Mr. Chair, if I may, one more question. Rose, if I may, the housing situation that you talk of, what kind of a relationship do you have with our Morrison County Social Services? Because I will tell you that tomorrow, Social Services will be in the same exact chair that you are, and they will be talking about housing and the need for financial assistance for that. So if we have that group, if you will, just picking numbers, whatever you want to call it, that group over here and this group here, how are the two of you joining and meeting up?
Yep, that's a good question. And social services is vital to our work. I would say, without, being absolute and everything, but essentially almost every person we work with is connected with social services at some level, whether that's just food support or medical, all the way up to getting sort of more intensive care. So they are a critical component to people having, resources, whether that's food, cash, or other support services. So they all, that's one of the first questions we do, the first things we do is make sure that they're connected for as many services as possible through social services. So that's important. At this stage, unless something's changed, they don't have the ability to house people. So we provide that sort of, you have a safe place to sleep tonight and while you're working through our program, so that you can focus on getting services, addressing your mental health, finding an apartment, keeping your kids in school, having a meal every day. So that's sort of the piece that we feel where we provide that shelter and connection to social services as well as any other appropriate agencies.
Very good, thank you.
Commissioners? All right. Thank you so much for being here with us today and for sharing your successes with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rose.
Next on the agenda, Hansel Hope. Good morning.
Good morning, Steph.
Stephanie Ock from Hansel Hope Resource Center. It's very interesting to listen to Rose talk because there's such an intersection between what she's seeing and the people she's working with and the system she's working with and what we're doing as well. So it's I don't have the same kind of statistics that I can provide to you that she did, but I wanted to just talk a little bit about what we're seeing. I brought some statistics from the last year and what we're seeing, and these are just people that we've served in Morrison County. So we worked with 258 victims of domestic violence, as well as 200 children living in those homes that were impacted by domestic violence. 86 victims of sexual assault, 44 of those were adults and 42 of them were children. And 147 victims of general crime, which are things like assault, survivors of homicide. We work with a lot of harassment type cases. And then also 77 additional victims of child abuse, which was like physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, that type of thing. What we've seen in the last year is that our services have remained pretty steady up until about the last 3 months. So the COVID impact has made a huge difference for us. Middle of March, we started working remotely, all of our staff working remotely, so all the services we were providing were being provided via our crisis line. And a lot more people reached out to us that way through the crisis line than how they were utilizing us before. But the other kind of trickle impact was that with courts not hearing cases and really not having the criminal trials and that type of thing continuing to go, a lot of those cases that we were working with, we weren't serving those victims. So we worked with about 100 individuals in April in Morrison County and about 100 in May. And then when we opened our office back up again at the end of May, it's doubled. So in June, we worked with almost 200 people. So I think we're gonna see things really increase, and we anticipated that, knowing that once the courts started opening up again and people could start getting into the office, because quite honestly, a lot of domestic violence victims in particular, which is the greatest number of people we serve, didn't have the ability to call on the crisis line or to get services or get help during that period of time. In fact, I've been getting messages through like our Facebook Messenger from people saying, I can't call, like he's here with me, and the only way I can reach out to you right now is if you can give me this resource or tell me what to do about this. And so we're having these conversations on the phone without actually talking. It's an interesting dynamic that we weren't necessarily seeing before. Not as often, I should say. So that's one of the biggest things that we're seeing. Our ability to go out and do community presentations, of course, has changed dramatically. So last year we did 40 presentations. These are community presentations to like schools, churches, civic groups, that type of thing. We did 40 presentations and reached about 2,645 people. We did 2 professional trainings, and then we did a lot of other outreach things like fairs, and we have a common sense self-defense class and just different things like that that we were able to do. We didn't do any of that the last few months. In fact, a lot of the things that we had scheduled to go out and finish up doing in the schools, we couldn't do any of those, and so our ability to go out and do things has changed dramatically. So we've tried to do things a little differently. We've created a YouTube page and tried to put out some videos that we can share to still do some education, but the way in which we're doing things has changed dramatically. We have seen a huge increase in the number of people that need emergency assistance from us. We've given out way more help with some rent and some food and other types of things to people in the last couple months than we have probably in the last year. Luckily, there have been a lot more places that are giving out COVID-related funds for emergency type assistance, and so we've accessed as many of those things as we can to bring that into our community and help the people that that we're serving in that way as well. We are starting to utilize our volunteers again. With our 24-hour crisis line, we have volunteers that take call, and then our staff are kind of back up to them. And so for a couple months, we weren't utilizing our volunteers at all. We were trying to do everything via our staff so that we didn't have to come in and out of the office and transfer phones, and it's kind of complicated, the system that we use. But now that we're able to utilize volunteers again, that's been helpful because it takes a little bit of the stress off of our staff. But we're always looking for volunteers. We just had a new person come on, which is really helpful for us because it helps us make sure that staff get a break from providing services from when they're in the office until the next day. Otherwise, you burn out people really quickly in this kind of work. And the other thing I wanted to just say is, you know, our one big fundraiser that we do for Hands of Hope is our concert, and so we had to cancel that in March. We postponed it till August, hoping that we would be able to do it then, and then we had to cancel that again too. So our concert is now going to happen next March, and so we've just been trying to really get out to the public and let people know that anybody who bought tickets can still, those are good. They can still use those tickets, or we will have tickets on sale. And if they choose to not do that, we will give them a refund for their tickets too. But like I said, fundraising is really big for us. And we're pretty stable for about another year, but our federal funding is probably going to be impacted. What we're being told is at the end of, we're in fiscal year 20, and in the fiscal year 2021, at the end of that, we'll be going back into competitive funding with other agencies like ours throughout the state, with less money that's coming in from the feds. And so it's going to be highly competitive, and we're going to have less money to deal with. And so we're definitely going to feel the impact of that. So we're trying to plan for that and trying to do everything we can to show that we're a really good, sound agency so that we can be competitive and continue to provide the services that we are in our area. So, are there questions for me?
Commissioner Jelinski?
Mr. Chair, I don't know that it's a question so much as Morrison County and Todd County have worked together, if you will, through Hands of Hope for years, and that relationship, I sit on that committee, or that board, if you will, that relationship has done nothing but grow as far as I'm concerned. The numbers that you spoke of today are numbers that were specific to Morrison County,
Yes.
I'm to assume.
Yeah.
And they're alarming, just as Rose's numbers were alarming that she came with and gave her presentation. I don't know that there's an answer when it comes time for funding for 2021. However, I do know, based upon my relationship with Hands of Hope, is that we've got very competent people that are working on successfully attaining funding, and whether it be competitive or not, I truly believe that we have great people in the program that are working that way. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And I'm not asking the board for any additional
No.
money. I just wanted to say
Yep.
that that's kind of our reality right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
I have a really
Thank
good
you, Mr.
grant
Chair.
writer, by the way. He's been pretty successful bringing in
Wonderful.
pots of money for us to continue to do our prevention education program, which is not funded through the state of Minnesota through Office of Justice programs, and so we've been really fortunate.
Yeah, very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everything you do. We all appreciate you very much. It's a tough job. My hat's off to you and your team.
Thanks for allowing us to share a little bit of information with you today.
Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for doing that.
You come back anytime you want.
Anytime.
I will. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next before us is Public Health Report.
Must not have no Brad today.
Good morning, ladies.
Morning, Sarah. Morning,
Good
Emily.
morning.
It's a long walk from back there.
Yeah.
So, good morning. Today we are bringing the Towards Zero Death resolution in front of you in hopes of your support to apply for the grant funding. Our grant year starts October 1st of 2020 and goes until September 30th of 2021. So when we apply for this grant, we have to include a resolution of your support. Last year, we received around $21,000, so we're assuming it'll be similar amount of money this next grant year. And so, we continue to see that this program is a need. From 2014 to 2018, Morrison County is still above average for alcohol-related injuries and fatalities. The state average was about 5.2 per year. Morrison County is around 7. We also see that we're above average for unbelted fatalities and serious injuries. The state average is about 3.4, and we're at about 5 per year. So for 2019, we've reviewed about 5 crashes. 2 of them were alcohol-related, 2 of them were speed, and 1 was a seatbelt. So we're still seeing that alcohol-related fatality injury occurring. Out of those, 4 were serious and 1 was a fatality. So that is what we're bringing forward today in hopes that you will give us the go.
I'll make a motion to approve with more discussion.
I'll second it.
Motion by Commissioner Wincher, second by Commissioner Jelinski. Any discussion? Commissioner Wincher?
Mr. Chair, if you would like, I would like to have you read the resolution, or Sarah or somebody, Emily, so we put that out there. And then before you do that, then after you do that, I have the question, and I know the answer, but where does this money go? So, there you go.
All right, I will go ahead and read this. Resolution authorizing execution of agreement. Be it resolved that Morrison County Public Health enter into a grant agreement with the Minnesota Department of Public Safety for traffic safety projects during the period from October 1st, 2020 through September 30th, 2021. The Morrison County Health Director is hereby authorized to execute such agreements and amendments as are necessary to implement the project on behalf of Morrison County Public Health. I certify that the above resolution was adopted by the Morrison County Board of Commissioners of Morrison County on July 14th, 2020.
And what was your question again?
Question was, this grant money, and I kind of self-explain, I understand, but what do you do with this money?
So we focus on traffic safety projects. We partner with law enforcement. They have their own grant. They do extra enforcement waves throughout the year. A lot of them that we see are speed, distracted driving, impairment, and then seat belts. And with our coalition that is funded through this grant, we are able to do those education on those things, as well as other things like motorcycles. We've been working with work sites to create safe driving policies. We do education in schools to local government like we are here. Pedestrian safety was added as an option for this next grant year, so we're gonna look into some of those things too.
Thank you for that explanation.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Jelinski?
Emily, I know that there's a lot of stuff that you do with the schools. And I think that it's extremely important that we continue to do that. Obviously, we're in COVID, and I understand all of that, but whether it's at school or whether it's an advertisement on the radio or whether it's a piece of paper that is at your local restaurant, if you will, the purpose of the grant that we're talking about is exactly that, advertising as much as anything, correct?
Yep.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Yeah, it was disappointing with COVID that we weren't
Yep.
able to do some of the things in the schools, prom, but Emily continues to put Facebook posts out and try to get that education and promotion out there, so.
We'll continue to be creative as we move
And you are,
forward.
very good, thank you.
Any further discussion?
Thank you for all you do.
All in favor to support this resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, Land Services. Good morning, Amy.
It's perfect.
Good morning, Amy.
It's like you knew. Weird.
All right, good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
All right, I think the first item I have for you, is it the plat?
The
Yep.
detail of the storage.
Yes, okay, thank you. First item I have for you today is to consider the common interest community / plat application known as detail storage for Jeff Hines. This would be the final plat that you'd be approving, and this was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission at their last meeting.
Commissioners? Could we get a motion and a second?
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Commissioner Wilson.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Wincher. Discussions? Is there any stipulations that are put on this property or anything like that?
Some,
No, there was some discussed at the public hearing, and the one was that a developer's agreement be, for the private roads, be entered into prior to commencing construction. However, since they're planned to be private roads with no expectation of the township to take them over, there really doesn't need to be any design oversight on those roads, and so that kind of fell off because we don't need to do a developer's agreement on this one as we previously thought.
Very good, thank you, Amy.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Wilson.
This is the one that you buy the spot in the storage building itself, right?
Yes, so you will buy, so this is a common interest community, so that means that you will own a parcel, but then you'll also be a part owner in the common space with it, and then you are responsible to build your own storage garage. And this is not for residential dwellings, it's for accessory structures, and then there is a declaration outlining maximum size, design, and all of that would accompany this plat.
It's kind of new for this area, isn't it? This
It
type of-
is.
I've seen this over by Alexandria, a few of these that were up, but that's kind of a nice way of people being able to build a storage shed on a piece of property and not have to go buy a bunch of stuff.
It is, especially in the lake area, because we have a lot of undersized lots there with people that have storage needs. And so we see them for variances because they can't meet setback. And so this offers another alternative for them to have some off-site storage a little bit closer by than going into the city limits to rent a storage building.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
All right, thank you. The next item is to consider the interim use permit for Eli and Rachel Miller. This request was to establish a limited rural business, specifically made-to-order shed construction business. This was also recommended by the Planning Commission at their last meeting with one condition, and that is that the interim use permit shall terminate when Eli and Rachel Miller no longer own the property subject to this permit.
I'll move on this, Mr. Chair.
Motion, go ahead.
I'll second.
Motion made by Commissioner Jelinski, second by Commissioner Wilson. Discussions? Commissioner Winter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Amy, since we brought these interim use permit, this kind of has nothing to do with the Miller permit, but how many do you think we brought forward since we implemented? I mean, just roughly guess, this has really helped our
Oh, gosh, yes.
community and our, for people trying to open up small businesses in the rural areas.
What it is, I agree with you, and I think it's really allowed the board a little bit more flexibility to consider requests more on a case-by-case basis and on a specific basis, because you have the ability to put the sunset date on these. So it has opened that up a little bit more for uses, but, oh gosh, we have had interim use permit ability now for 2 or 3 years, I believe. And we're regularly seeing more of those. I think we're seeing just as many interim use permits as we are conditional use permits now for some of these uses, and most of them are small businesses, small home businesses.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
All right, thank you. And then I'm gonna switch gears to the assessing side of things, and I do have an abstract of abatements for you. We have one for Shane and Rebecca Barclay. This is one where Homestead was, well, we had a property transfer error apparently over in the Auditor Treasurer's office, which also followed with the removal of Homestead. That was corrected, putting the Homestead back on, so we've got a property tax credit that we need to process.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Commissioner Wilson. Second by Commissioner Blaine. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, that's all I have for you.
Thank you, Amy.
Next on the agenda, Auditor's Report. Good morning, Chelsea.
Thank you, sorry.
Morning, Chelsea.
Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Same to you.
Thanks.
Yes.
Before you today, I am requesting approval for the off-highway vehicle trail fiscal year 2020 grant contract agreement with the state of Minnesota for the Eastern Morrison County Four-Wheel Club Sioux Line South Recreational Trail Funding. I also have a second part to this motion, is also to authorize the disbursements of funds as they're received. Our agreement to sponsor the Four-Wheeler Club was approved on September 24th of last year.
Very good. Can we do them together?
Yep, but do those roll call, please.
Okay.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Commissioner Wilson,
Second.
second by Commissioner Jelinski. Discussions? This will be a roll call. Commissioner Winter?
Aye.
Commissioner Jelinski?
Aye.
Commissioner Blaine?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Motion carried.
Next on the agenda, I'm requesting approval for the Clear Lake Lions Club to hold a raffle on September 19th at the Stone Creek Golf Course.
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Winter. Second by Commissioner Blaine.
Yes.
Discussion?
Yes.
Commissioner Blaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Help me out here. This looks like an organization in Benton County.
Where the raffle is located is within Morrison,
Oh,
and so that's why it's being brought before you. This is a raffle that was to be held, I believe, the beginning of this year, and it was postponed. And so they are requesting approval for the state of Minnesota gambling unit.
so the raffle will not, Mr. Chair, thank
Yes.
you. So the raffle will not be taking place the same time as the golf event at the Stone Creek Golf Course in Foley?
It is listed as off-site gambling.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chair, I'm not exactly sure what that means. Where does that event take place?
So the event is at the Stone Creek Golf Course, and then the raffle is an off-site raffle, so I believe they can be selling raffles off-site of the event.
Is Clear Lake Lions Club in Morrison County?
I don't believe so, but when they have an event that's within Morrison, they have to bring it forward. So Foley is part on the line of Morrison.
I think we've done these guys before,
Yeah,
haven't we?
this has been brought to board.
Every year?
It must be very, Mr. Chair, very little of it in Morrison, actually. Is it right on? I apparently it's touches Morrison, but I guess we don't have many Foley addresses within Morrison County.
That's correct.
Oh, it's the address that touches
Where it's
Morrison
at,
County.
yep.
Thank you. That I get, finally. Sorry, it took a little while.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
My last request today is requesting approval for board warrants.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to pay the warrants.
Motion by Commissioner Blaine.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Winter. Discussions? This will be a roll call. Commissioner Jelinski?
Aye.
Commissioner Blaine?
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Commissioner Winter?
Aye.
Motion carried.
And then if I could, Mr. Chair, just a couple of updates with both departments.
Yes, please.
So in the Auditor Treasurer's Office, we are heavily in our August primary election, so we are working busy. We know that our absentee requests for ballots are increased tremendously. So we have quite a bit of work on our plate. And I just wanted to give you an update, and I'll go into more depth as I learn. But we received CARES grant funding specifically for elections. So I'm working through those dollars right now to see how they'll be dispersed and utilized. And once I have an agreement in front of me and more information and knowledge, I will be bringing that forward to board. And then just an update with motor vehicle. Currently, we are processing transactions by appointment, and we've been reviewing our flow. Back when this first started, we were shut down completely by the state with no options. It was a shutdown completely, no, not being in the system at all, to being able to be working in the office, but not with face-to-face customers. Then to being authorized to be open with face-to-face transactions, with having a plan in place to the state of Minnesota on how we are going to reopen with face-to-face transactions and monitor social distancing, and the safety and well-being of our staff and our individuals who come through the door. My staff and I have been looking over our flow of traffic, and we're getting to a point where we feel that we can be able to monitor both incoming traffic as walk-ins, along with having the opportunity for appointments too, because we have heard that individuals who are scheduling appointments enjoy it because they know what scheduled time they are coming into the office and knowing that they're going to be served. We also hear that, it would be nice to be able to have the walk-in ability, and knowing that you may wait in line for quite some time, depending on what type of service you're requesting. So we are working with departments on getting that set up as far as staffing and communications, and knowing that we have social distancing in place and having hand sanitizer available for individuals, and really making sure that we're monitoring the flow. So we're looking at a date soon. It's not set in stone yet, but we have a lot of working partners within the organization of the county to pull together to make changes in a short amount of time.
Commissioner Blaine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Chelsea, going back to the CARES grant funding on elections, do we have a dollar amount that we know of?
We do have a dollar amount. I don't have it in front of me today. It's a little under $30,000.
So will that money be utilized within the county, or meaning the county proper, or will this funding be also utilized to help townships with their elections, or are the townships looking at getting CARES grant election funding on their own? Can you help me out there?
So how the grant has came over from the state is that it's broken out into portions for the county and for the open polling places. That is how it's laid out. However, the county can make agreements with the municipalities on how to offset the funding. And so that is something that I'm working on, best practices for that amount. So some of the questions are, this funding is specific to COVID-19 and in relations to elections. So some of the questions have been, can this money be offset by additional staffing in the polling places for sanitizing? Yes, that's related to COVID-19. Additional pens being purchased for voters so that they're using a pen and then they're putting it in a box that's to be sanitized. All those little costs add up quite a bit. And so all of that can be related into the CARES grant, specific for elections, both county and municipalities within Morrison County.
Can that also be used for the added expenses for all the townships that chose to do mail-in ballots?
We are looking at that in that language. Every municipality sets a budget for cost, whether they have open polling places or closed. So if you were to have an open polling place, you would have election judges and you would have salary and cost. And if you go to a mail-in precinct, mail ballot precinct, you have the cost of postage, ballots.
Does that cost go onto the township or does that go onto the county? The cost of
The
postage?
cost would go allocated back to the precinct.
Okay.
Yep.
How about you? Is there added labor, added workload for you on the mail-in ballots? There has to be.
The numbers have increased, yes. So there's additional work. Along with communication, there's been a lot of calls to our office, just asking the practices. We have voter information. There's an organization, I believe, that sends out applications. So when they do those pushes, that organization sends out those applications for a mail ballot for both August or election. We have quite a bit that get returned to our office because they are labeled directly back to our office. So we get phone calls that it's coming from our office, which it's not. It's coming from this organization.
Commissioner Blaine.
Follow up to motor vehicle. I'm just curious, earlier on when we've met here in months previous during the COVID situation, I'll say, and the motor vehicle office in the courthouse was when we reopened, and we were handling a lot of volume because there was a lot of other counties that were not opening or processing that work. Now that most of the counties are kind of on the same keel here, has our volume, dropped off significantly? Are we right now kind of back to what would be probably normal pre-pandemic, or what's your thought on that? I mean, obviously you're looking at changing how you're going to handle the public or the staff there in motor vehicle. So obviously there has to be a little bit of a change in volume, or is that the comfort level of staff in trying to help as many of these people in their needs?
Good question, Commissioner Blaine. There's a lot that goes into this decision making. Number one, when we first opened by appointment only, you have to remember and recall that the staffing that I had, a third of my staffing for frontline we didn't have. And so now we have our new hires coming in. You met Melody. She's been here for a month, and she is able to work on the motor vehicle side. When we have a new hire, they can't jump into the driver's license right away. It will take probably 2 or 3 months before she can start working. New hires can start working in the driver's license sector. We have another new hire that will be starting the beginning of August. And so we feel comfortable that we'll have the staffing measures to take on the walkthrough for motor vehicle. We're going to look at, we know that there has been a backlog and a demand for driver's license before COVID. We know that before COVID we had a line out the door, and the line and the timing was because of driver's license. Driver's license transactions take longer than motor vehicle transactions, and we've also learned that with Real ID and enhanced driver's license, there is a lot of paperwork that you need to bring into the office and be prepared, and sometimes when a customer comes in, they don't have the correct documentation when they come in for their appointment or when they were standing in line, and so it gets frustrating. And our communication now with our appointment system is that if you have a mobile phone, we are notifying the individual that this is your appointment and your time, but it also brings you to a link to complete a pre-application online. And then it also goes over what documents are required for that type of driver's license. So our communication is better than what it was before, I believe. And also looking at my staffing and the flow that we can handle with both appointments and walk-in. Looking at the schedule, we know that we can have a few staff members on the motor vehicle transaction line if we have walk-ins. We know that standard driver's license are processing at a faster pace rather than real and enhanced. And so we are looking at continuing to maybe keep some appointments specific driver's license types by appointment only, because we know that there is a backlog. We know that there is extensions in place. So with the peacetime emergency being pushed out again another 30 days, anyone who is in the peacetime emergency has until the end of October to renew their driver's license, so they have an extension in time. The state of Minnesota has also put out that with standard driver's license, you can renew your standard driver's license online. So we're working together on making it better, even though we have to maintain social distancing. We know that there's a backlog, and that backlog will be there continuously. But we feel that with staffing, we are able to very soon be able to take appointments and walk in. We've had the pleasure of having additional staff members from other departments help us out, and we hope to see that continue, as some departments may not have the workload, and it may be adjusted due to the pandemic, that we're able to have staffing help us out through this transition, with motor vehicle being one of the main departments with demand in incoming face-to-face transactions. A lot of the departments can do transactions by phone or WebEx, where our department, it is face-to-face. We during the shutdown, when we could not do face-to-face transactions, it was challenging doing title transfers through the mail and over the phone. It was hard, and so we know that, and we enjoy the face-to-face transactions. We know that it's easier on the customers, and we know it's easier on our staff, and we enjoy seeing the public coming in again. But we know that we're still in a pandemic, and we know that we need a social distance, and we're sanitizing between customers coming to our stations. We have measures in place because of where we're in right now.
Deb?
Mr. Chair, I think Chelsea makes a good point. I mean, certainly you as a board have stressed where and how we can work together as an organization. And so we do have staffing from admin that's helped from the outset in terms of answering phones and greeter positions. We have some social services staff that are redeployed. We have that luxury now, and that's a good thing. And we're all working towards trying to make sure that gets us to a point where staff is functioning and able to have that department serve the needs of the public. But it's been nice, and I'm proud of staff for stepping up and helping in other areas and being flexible in that regard. It's a good thing for an organization to be able to cross those lines and work together. So I appreciate that. And then it's also been so interesting because even as we've migrated, the state in their approach, what they've allowed us to do, what they haven't allowed us to do, what they've said we need to put in place, and then what they've changed with that has been a struggle in terms of trying to get a good solid plan in place in addition to our staffing and having shortages, and preparing for the fact that, if somebody does fall ill within the department staff, being able to function, and how do we accommodate that, and how do we make sure we're not operating in a way that puts people more at risk, so we wipe out an entire staff that then can't help anybody at all. So there's some, unique challenges that we need to make sure we're paying attention to, but we're working towards getting there. And I think it's important because we all want to be there, because we need to be serving those folks in the way that we're moving forward with it. But been appreciative in us meeting on a regular basis, and we're working towards getting that to happen soon. And so,
Commissioner Wilson?
I want to thank you for all the work you do. I know this has been hard, but I think most of us commissioners have been getting calls on this one. You know, about people waiting, they don't know what to do. I think that's the biggest thing. So I just want to stress that we do more sooner than later, because it is a major problem and we do everything we can. And I know you're doing that, you know, but people are frustrated out there because they want to get this done and they don't know what to do, some of them, you know, so I thank you for that. And I know you're working hard on it, and we don't know everything that's going on all the time, but it's something that needs to be taken care of.
Commissioner Winter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chelsea, what's the difference if I make an appointment and I come in, and again, I'm a firm believer that the staff's, health and well-being is very important. If I come in, you're gonna engage with me, whether you've got a social distancing or whatever, then that walk-in, because again, it's been said that we're not prepared, and you read all the ifs and whats that the governor put out there, and really, again, how do you interpret it? I understand that. But if we were to open, what would be the difference of that person, other than the social distancing, and possibly we'd have to have them wear a mask or whatever, than that appointment? So what would change between having somebody walk in and stand in line, do the 6, 10, 12 feet, versus for a staff member, then that person that comes in and makes an appointment? So
Sure.
my question would be is, why are we not able to open sooner than later?
Right. So I had a meeting just recently with departments that we were talking about opening and what that looks like. We have to update our communication. We have to update our website. We have to have staff utilizing different systems and software to be able to continue the traffic flow. Like I said, my staffing, some of them cannot process driver's license transactions, and so we're looking at in our office, we have one camera station and we have one driver's license camera and exam station. So we know that we're gonna have appointments and we know that we're gonna have walk-in when we get to that point. I don't believe that our flow of traffic has decreased from the beginning of when we were starting non-face-to-face, but processing through the mail, okay? So when we first started, we were processing through the mail. We were having dealers drop off. Our mail was through the roof. And so we had a large volume of processing behind the scenes without any face-to-face transaction. And then we were given the go-ahead from the state of Minnesota to open, if we so choose, for face-to-face transactions. So reminding you that some departments did not open face-to-face right away like we did in Morrison County. We implemented the appointments because we knew that there was going to be the demand, but we knew that we had to continue social distancing, and it was a new normal for us, and it's going to continue. We know that when we're taking appointments for driver's license and we're taking walk-ins, we know that some staff can take walk-ins and some staff can't process driver's license at this point. A lot of what individuals don't see is that we still have the mail coming in. We still have individuals that do not want to come into the office and that still continue to process transactions by mail. We still have our dealers dropping off stacks of work for us. So even if you see a staff member in the office who's not waiting on someone, know that they may be pushing through more transactions than an individual who has a full day of appointments scheduled. We have the behind the scenes work that visually and mentally you don't see because you're not within the office. So my staff, we work together and we've had the conversations of, are we ready to open? Are we comfortable? Are we able to maintain both walk-in and appointment transactions? Do we have the staffing? Will we have the staffing if an individual becomes ill or has to be out of office because of COVID-19? It is real. We have departments that are going through it. And so we're weighing many, many factors as we make these decisions. We know that the residents come first, and it's been challenging with the state of Minnesota and working with these guidelines. There's best practices out there that state for motor vehicle offices. I'll give you an example. Some offices are open and they are doing self-check exams at the door with both staff and individuals that are walking in. So I don't foresee that being the case in Morrison County. If you're well, come into the office. If you're not well, please stay home. We're not requiring masks. If you want to wear a mask, please do so. If not, and if you're not comfortable wearing a mask at this point, you don't need to. We've seen a variety of both in the office. So there's measures that are recommended. And some offices are implementing them heavily, and some offices aren't. And so we've seen that, and we've heard that about different departments on how some DMV offices are open fully with no appointments and just walk in. And we also have the offices that are completely by appointment, and no matter what, if you have an open walk-in or you have by appointment, we're not going to please everyone. But we need to get to that happy medium, and so that's where we're going. And I'm looking for sooner than later, so.
All right.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, Chelsea. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for the update, Chelsea.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Have a good day, Chelsea.
Thanks, you too.
Next on the agenda, administrators report. Deb?
Hold it, we got Steve.
Oh,
Yep.
sorry. Jumped right over you, Steve. I checked you already.
That'll answer.
Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Morning, Steve.
Good morning. I have 3 action items for your consideration today. The first 2 go together, and we talked about this quite a while back in a planning meeting, but we've taken it through the process of tweaking our county state aid highway system in the city of Royalton. The county has a small amount of mileage in its bank, which we don't draw funds on. It kind of builds up as you do some reconstruction. You may cut a vertical down or reconstruct a horizontal curve. You get 1/10 of a mile added to your bank because the length of the road no longer is the same. And it's very, they're very accurate with that. We had 1/4 of a mile in our bank system, and we were looking for a place to apply it. And this seems to be the very best location in order to use that up. You can see our County State Aid Highway 27. Currently, it starts at Nature Road, the beginning of the green portion. It goes north, and then it takes a slight right and goes north all the way to our CASA 34. Even with our maintenance crews, when they come in and they're plowing CASA 27, when they come in from the north, they'll go out to US Highway 10, that little red piece, and plow that because it's easier for them to turn around early in the morning. So we've been doing some maintenance on it. It's less than 2/10 of a mile. What we're recommending to the board in order to get it on our system, we'll start drawing funds on it. It contributes to our mileage, it contributes to our needs. The two resolutions redesignate the segments. It would redesignate CSA 27, beginning at US Highway 10, going to the east, and then following the old alignment all the way up to CSA 34. We're recommending then the old piece of Trunk Highway, or CSA 27, which is shown in green, be redesignated as County State Aid Highway 105. So we'll have two segments. It only adds 2/10 to the mileage system, but it then takes that off our bank system when we start drawing state aid funds on it. The city of Royalton had gone over with this, both with Commissioner Wincher and the mayor, and they have concurred if you adopt these resolutions, which is something we would need in order to put it on our system. So that is my recommendation.
Mr. Chair, I'll make that motion.
Motion by Commissioner Wincher,
Second.
second by Commissioner Blaine. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
And that is for both resolutions.
Do you want them
Yeah, that would be for both of the resolutions, my motion
Okay,
was.
that'd be fine.
for both? Commissioner Blaine, is that your part of your motion? Yep. If that's,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, then the third action item relates to request for a traffic study and investigation for the appropriate speed zone on our County Road 257, which is the new piece of road that was constructed out by the airport. We're asking that the state of Minnesota look at the segment from Trunk Highway 27, 4th Street, going out towards St. Otto's and the hospital, and then crossing over Highway 10 and going all the way out to 160th Avenue. That is the segment that we've recently constructed. It's a nice piece of road. Traffic seems to be moving pretty fast on it. We've had a number of calls coming in that as they come into the city of Little Falls, they're moving pretty fast. So we'd like the state to look at the appropriate speed zone on the segment, and that's what this resolution would do. So I'd request that the board adopt this.
Commissioners?
So move, Mr. Chair.
Motion by Commissioner Blaine,
Second for more discussion.
second by Commissioner Wincher. Further discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve, we as the county do not set the speed limits, the state does, and that's kind of probably why we're going through this, correct?
In this situation, we do not, we don't have the ability because of the conditions out there. The statute will allow the county board to establish speed zones in certain circumstances. Depends on access, and there's other criteria in the statute that would allow you. This doesn't apply. It doesn't apply in this situation. That's why we request actually the traffic engineer from MnDOT District 3 will do the investigation, then the Commissioner of Transportation establishes the speed zone. That's the process in order to have a legal speed zone that can be enforceable.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Jelinski.
Steve, so if we're talking about right at the start of Highway 27 on 4th Street, if you will, as city limits can be, or residential as
Yes.
residential
Yep.
can be,
Mhm.
the traffic study would actually start right there at Highway 27. I would expect that the state's probably not going to increase the speed from Highway 27 to St. Otto's, if you will. I would expect that. I don't know that. But maybe once you get over the bridge, the Highway 10 bridge, if you will, that maybe there's a 45 speed limit to then increase on our new road to a 55, just as an example. Would that be correct?
Exactly. They want good termini for the segment, and so that's why we're using 27 and 160th as the termini, even though that's really not the focus of where the zone would be.
Got it. Thank you.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Steve.
Steve.
Have a great day.
You too.
Now, next on the agenda, Deb.
I am going to, if you don't mind, invite Carol up, and we can
Morning,
talk
Carol.
about, I sent you a copy, and Steve's here also, of follow-up to some discussion we've previously had regarding the CARES money. We did get the CARES money deposited into the county. Oh, it's been a week, 2 weeks. Time flies sometimes. Yeah, right before the holiday. So that did come in. As we've discussed before, a component of that will be regarding or involved in a business assistance program. And so in order to proceed with that, we solicited the help of Carol, who's a little bit more in this business than what the county is, to assist with this. And so maybe if you want to work through the application and we can talk about what it involves and whether or not you are in agreement on how we're moving forward.
Yeah. So what I did is I looked at what the state was kind of saying for their grant program that they had. Then I merged that in with what the city had on their program and the city of Pierce. So what I did is, you know, here is the first page is, you know, your basic stuff, you know. Are there any other business partners? The next question, have you received funding from any other sources? And it's important that we know that, because depending on the sources, we can't use this money for some of those. Example, somebody got a grant from the state that they used to pay their utility bills with, okay? And they paid them. Well, then they're gonna come around and say, hey, give me money to pay my utility bills, when they already got state funding to do that. So we wanna kinda, you know, sift that out. But and I put right in here, however, if you got money from the SBA, then you're eligible for these programs. It's only state money that we can't double dip. And if you got it, what was it used for? How has the governor's closure order affected your business? How much are you requesting? And then I go into, this is a grant program. Ceiling, you can set it. I just threw $5,000 in now for discussion purposes. Business must be a for-profit business that has a permanent physical location in Morrison County. We saw with the Little Falls program, there would be somebody just outside the city limits. And so they said, you're not eligible for this. It's for in the city limits. So those businesses, this gets up and running, I'd go back to them and say, we have a program now to help you. It must be majority owned by a permanent resident of Morrison County. They have to be in good standing with the Secretary of State and the Department of Revenue as of March 1st. And been in business through the state audit. It's what Piers used, December 1st, 2019. All eligible applicants must provide proof that they filed a recent federal tax return. What I usually have them do is send me the first page of their taxes, show that they're filed. Let's see. Then we take the applications are going to be reviewed by the Morrison County Rural Development Finance Authority for approval. The applications need to be returned to community development by Wednesday noon of every week. I just picked that date out. I mean, it could be any date. Bills for expenses must be included with the application. If you're saying I want my utilities bills paid, give me a copy of them so we know.
Carol, I have a question for you on that. Let's say I was closed down for the 2 months. So I would probably be asking for this grant because I had no money coming in. So I'd still have my normal bills, but what about the money I didn't make? I mean, could that be part of, I don't know, that's what I guess my question is.
Well, normally, these programs don't replenish that.
Okay.
Okay, and because and the ones that do, you could say, all right, show me your, you have QuickBooks, okay? Show me your QuickBooks of what you made in May of 19 and what you've made in May of 20, and then we could help fund the difference. You know, you could do it that way, but a lot of people don't use QuickBooks.
Mr. Chair, isn't that what Deed did with that most recent? They looked at last year to this year, and it wasn't necessarily an expense reimbursement, but a proven income loss.
Yeah. And you would have to be able,
Deed, just, Department of Economic Development in the state.
yeah.
They just ran a extra, I don't know, 67 million or something like that. That's what's ringing a bell. I can't remember if that is. And did $10,000 grants that really were that. It wasn't so much about an expense reimbursement component, but about an income loss component. So there was different qualifiers. It was a lottery system in terms of who was able to receive ultimately the $10,000 increment. I mean, it was all 10 grand. It was up to that point. So I don't know what the percentage success rate was with people who had applied or anything like that. But it is a different philosophy, and certainly you guys are here to set that program in terms of what it is you think would qualify. Carol, when you said earlier that SBA funding, they're still eligible, is that the PPP, or what is the SBA funding? Which programs, I guess?
SBA was running several programs, okay, and PPP was just one of them.
Okay.
But there were some loans that ran through the banks through the SBA. EIDL, I think, was one, or something like that.
Are most of those expense reimbursement type of qualifiers that you're aware of?
Yes.
So maybe this would be a different component similar to that deed thing and catch some of those. But we do need to kind of, how do we prove out to our grant, through an audit that qualification was met?
I guess the real story is if they can get reimbursed for money that they had to spend, that had nothing coming in for, that's probably good enough.
Yeah, it would be easy.
Unless they've already been reimbursed for that, and then it's are they going to qualify, or is there gonna be enough that qualify that they haven't already been reimbursed? I don't know.
And I took this right from the state grant program that they had.
Yeah.
So it must be a permanent physical location. They had state of Minnesota. I put Morrison County. The reason I did that is because if the auditors come back and say, well, how did you come up with this? Well, here, I took it right from the state program.
Carol, Steve has a question. Steve?
Yes, I mean, I think most of this CARES money and all the FAQs that
I'm gonna have you do it, just so it's
the people
microphone, yep. Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning, Steve.
Morning, Steve.
Most of the FAQs I'm reading on this 601D of this CARES Act is mostly reimbursing expenses. But there is talk, more money coming out, because most of, I think what they're hearing is that it's the revenue loss that's hurting them more than the expenses, because you close things, you just staff are laid off and different things like that. You still have utilities to pay, rent and things like that, and that's what they're trying to help out with. So I think there's programs coming to help offset revenue loss, but I don't think any of this money is intended for that, from what I've read. Because because if that was the case, we could do some property tax relief and some of those other things, but we can't do that.
Because what I was thinking of when I mentioned that, if I didn't make any money, now how do I pay my own bills that I personally would have made money out of my business?
Yeah.
Unless that falls underneath, I didn't get to pay myself, and usually it doesn't qualify that the owner gets to pay himself, so.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yes, you're right. This isn't a revenue reimbursement, and I knew that from a county perspective. I was thinking of that differently with the business perspective. But yes, the CARES funding that we did receive specifically said that, Steve, you're right. And I think there's nothing that we've heard that this program or subset of that funding can work differently than the overall regulations for that. And so, good point. So,
I mean,
no,
there's some more, I think tomorrow, Deb and I are
Yep.
on some more from all county-wide, and maybe there's an interpretation out there that we're not seeing, that others are. I mean, it's pretty wide open, but from what I've read and all the FAQs, and I've seen like 4 different sets of FAQs come out on the same thing, and it all seems like it's expense reimbursement and not any revenue loss reimbursement.
Yep, you're
Mr.
right.
Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Winter.
Steve, Carol, going to the ag, again, I understand the income or versus the, utilities or whatever. If I'm an dairy farmer, I couldn't get rid of my milk, so maybe I had to store it longer, or I couldn't sell my grain. Are they gonna be in that too? But then you ask for, again, not you, but they're asking for proof that, hey, I had to keep my corn in I could have sold it, but due to the trucks not being able to come or whatever, is that gonna be under this?
No, I don't think so. That's under FSA. your FSA office is where you go for that kind of
For the
help.
loss of your utilities, so again, for
No.
storage,
Now, utilities is different.
that's what I'm talking
Yeah.
about, see?
When it comes to utilities, you know, they could come and say, hey, you know, my electric bill is $1,300 a month for 3 months, you know. By what I've read, that would be eligible for this, you know. So particularly say you got a hog barn, or you've got your layer barn, or whatever. As I read it, and specific questions were asked, can farmers apply? And what I saw was yes. So,
But in regards to more costs for storage, I would assume those, if they're related to COVID, I don't see any reason why they couldn't. If I had to store my corn for 3 more months because I couldn't get anyone to pick it up, and there's a cost to that, I'm pretty sure we could reimburse for that.
I think so also, Mr. Chair, and I think also if they had to get rid of produced, product is the wrong word, because it could be animals or what, if they had to, what is that word? Yeah, but they also talked about
euthanize.
depopulating things is an eligible expense under this CARES funding specifically addressed to that. So that might be something that we could maybe kind of go into how egg producers would fit in a little bit more too, to make that a little bit more explanatory or possible. Could be a suggestion.
And Mr. Chair, the biggest key here is you can't use it to offset revenues, and that's where a lot of people are gonna go, well, hey, I lost. No, this does not apply to that, and we have to really, explain that.
That's where the application process is important, like Carol said, because this is federal dollars subject to single audit.
Right.
And when the auditors come in next year, we're gonna have to show them the paperwork to prove that the money we gave them was legitimately spent on cost reimbursement due to COVID.
Yep, and Mr. Chair, hopefully they'll come with dollars for that very reason, like that deed program did. And that way, if there's still a need out there, that we can help fill that too.
well, and the one thing we are gonna need, and I'm probably gonna need a little help, from Brian, is, we have to have them sign a grant agreement, okay? It can be simple, a one-pager saying, this is what I'm gonna spend the money on, and if I don't spend it, then I am liable to repay it, you know, and they have to sign that before they get the check.
Commissioner Blaine?
Mr. Chair, thank you. You know, 2 points that come to me that I think are very, very important. One, the statement that Carol just made that ensures a level of accountability by recipients of funds out there. That's a point that's extremely important to me. I think is and should be extremely important to everybody on this board. But I think the other thing too, and I'm very grateful that Steve is here with us to clarify this issue, because we've kind of got slogged in the mud about this in past discussions about this, about whether any of this funding could be utilized to replace lost revenue. I'm glad that we've clarified that. I don't want this discussion to get back in the muddy water on that. So if we all understand that, unless there would be communication or revelations that would be forthcoming that would change that I think it becomes helpful to us and the process going forward, and makes this probably less of a daunting task than what we were first looking at, because I think that was the part that it certainly gave me the most angst or the most headache, was going into this issue of you know, replacing lost revenue, and how do people prove they lost this much revenue, when we've talked about the many varied facets of how people track their business, however they track their business, if they track their business, bookkeeping, accounting, run your checkbook, or whatever. So that all being said, I think we can kind of zero our focus in on the contract at hand, the process at hand, and the perspective that Carol has laid out here, and in kind of some of them guidelines, and be able to look at moving this forward in that sense, and not have to worry about that whole other giant elephant, and we can kind of keep that one out of the room, at least for this point in time. If there is money that would come on that, we'll deal with that, but otherwise, I want to make sure that we keep this focused to what we're actually doing, if that's possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, this is maybe a question for Carol. The City of Little Falls loan program, and the Piers, City of Piers too. Now, some of these businesses may have, they got 5,000, that was the cap, right? Have they had more expenses than the 5,000 involved in this, where they would then, if we offer something then, this is where I'm thinking we're gonna get questions, because let's say they had $10,000 in costs, they got 5,000 from the city, are we gonna have enough to prove? This is what I'm concerned about. I mean, this is where I'm thinking it gets muddied. You talk about trying to clear the muddy waters. I mean, if they've applied for a loan, are we gonna say, no, you're not eligible anymore? I mean, because there may be businesses that have incurred way more expenses than the $5,000 they got from, or maybe some other money they got. I don't know, but I'm just saying that, is that question gonna come up, and do we just, if they've applied and got something, they're not eligible? I mean, I don't know.
Well, with the city program, the state wasn't looking at that, I don't think, in their application. And I think what happened with the city program, I think a lot of them used it to pay the property taxes. And the city didn't care, what you used your money for. So, and then you're going to have, and every business is gonna be different, but, a bar, for example, had to go out and buy more booze to open up, or if they have a restaurant too, or they serve food, they had to go out and buy all the food to get set up, all of that. Now, if you look here on page 3, it says eligible costs can be used for working capital to support payroll expenses, rent, mortgage payments, utility bills, and other similar expenses that occur or have occurred. Your water bill, water and sewer bill, working capital is kind of a nebulous type of a thing.
Can I clarify that exact point? I think it's costs related to the COVID pandemic. So it's not just about your customary utility bill. It's not just about your water bill or stuff you would have kind of almost had regardless. I just had to pay more for the wine I served because I can't buy big bottles. I have to buy little bottles to be able to serve out the door in a different way. And so I think some of it is comparing from year to year, but it's not just about what I've made on the income side of things so much as it is about what you've compared to the expense side of things. So it's a little hokey. It's not that side of the conversation. It's kind of the other one in terms of it's cost me more to do business how I've had to do it because of the executive orders, and that is eligible, I believe, or that could be a discussion about what's eligible. Does that make sense? And what I was trying to get at in a different way.
Commissioner Blaine?
Yes, and thank you for that, Deb, too, and I agree with you on that perspective. And thank you, Steve, again, for bringing up this point, and that was my original question that I totally gapped out, but so we're looking at this, at utilizing this revenue in a county-wide to address county businesses. And so my question, going back to our earlier comment, Carol, you said before that the money that the City of Little Falls had and City of Pierce had, that they gave away to their businesses and let them use it for a pretty wide painted brush array of things. But then if you were a business right outside the City of Little Falls, then then you were told no, you're not eligible. So are we going to keep this to businesses that are located outside the city of Little Falls and the city of Pierce?
I would say no. That would be my recommendation.
It is up to you.
You mean this here?
Yep,
I thought we're talking about the whole county.
yep, you can, but it's up to you.
But, yeah,
Yes, if you
do we
decide.
No,
to-
I'm
The cities.
Well, I think,
The city of Little Falls, the city of Pierce had revenue that they put forth to help those businesses already, but did not make that revenue was not made available to businesses outside of those city limits. Okay, so if we're going to look at this, I'm not gonna say that we're going to make this money exclusive to businesses outside of the city limits, but because those businesses have already accessed a revenue stream that are located within the city limits, I would say they go to the back of the line, and we're going to at least first recognize the businesses outside of the city limits that never had access to a revenue stream. Well,
That's why Carol has the questions asked.
I'll entertain thoughts on that from the rest of the board.
well, Mr.
Well,
Chair,
and that's why she has them questions, I believe, to be specific on the amount of funding that you have received from other entities. And then I believe your plan is to have the board then determine which ones you feel deserve it more willingly or
Right.
more needing of it than others.
So, yeah, and do you
The
give
RDFA, there you go,
preference?
Thank you.
because I would have to agree with that on the fact that, let's say I didn't get nothing for some odd reason, but let's say somebody in Piers got $1,000, now I would probably take the nothing first and look at that. Then I would look at the $1,000 compared to other things that are equivalent, because some businesses didn't get much by the way the grant was written versus other businesses in other towns. So, I think that's what your questions are for. Be specific on what money you did get, because the real just here is, if I had $5,000 in expenses that I did not be able to bring in money for, how can I recover that? And back to Deb's question before, I think a clothing store is probably a very good example. They had their winter inventory that they normally would sell out before spring. They're ordering their stuff, and they couldn't sell that because it's already summer. And I think that's an example, if you could show me that you had that loss and expense occurred because of that would be some qualification.
Like the specific question, how has the governor's executive order financially affected your business? I think that'll be one of the toughest questions for people to answer, to have them move up on the list, like Greg said, to receive funding.
I just, my two thoughts on this, and I may be speaking a little strong on this, but it goes back to trying to reach some level of equity or fairness to all the businesses within our county. And I think the other part of this is, in my mind, maybe this was a panacea thought, but was to somehow be able to cast a wider net to allow help to a greater number of businesses, rather than we keep pumping money into a select few. And that's sounding like absolutes, but I'm being kind of broad in my statement there. I would rather at the end of the day say we tried and we were successful in giving at least some help to as many businesses as we possibly could in the county, and let everybody have at least some relief, versus making it, the first 100 that got got their paperwork in, they sucked up all the cash and now there's none left and it goes back to, the other point I want to make about this is I've heard repeatedly from businesses, in my district and I don't represent any of the city of Little Falls, that yeah, we kind of feel left out. Yeah, they know and they hear about the fact that money was dispersed by the city of Little Falls through EDA, thank you, to these businesses. And they're coming to me and commenting to me, but what about us? Don't we, do we matter to you? Meaning
We weren't giving out the loan.
to Morrison County? Yes.
Why would they say that when we weren't giving out the loan? It was the cities that were
Yeah,
giving out
but this is their frustration in the fact that they feel that they have been forgotten about because they are not in the city of Little Falls, the city of Pierce. And so this is kind of my response into saying, I think it's important that we look at all those businesses out there and we promote this to them to look at, for them to take the initiative to look at these funding options themselves too, so.
Well, Mr. Chair, though, the other thing to remember too, there's a number of cities and townships that are also receiving these dollars. And so, we met last week, Carol and I, Deb couldn't make it, met with the mayors and council members in the city of Royalton and had a conversation with them. And so they were looking at things, but it's such a short time frame to try to know how to pull all these cities and townships together to come up with some kind of plan. I mean, there just isn't enough time, I don't think. I mean, we have our money, we're gonna come up with a plan, we're gonna spend it, but they're gonna have to do similar things, and if they don't spend it, we get it.
And Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yep.
Thank you. Which further emphasizes the importance of us putting together a very legitimate plan that's very accountable, but that could service all of these people because of exactly what you said, Steve. Small townships that may look at this and say, we can't take this on. A, we don't have the knowledge base. B, we don't have the time or know-how or wherewithal. We show them that we have a product in place to do this. I could see where it would be in their best interest to relinquish that revenue to us and have us distribute. And we will look at those businesses in those towns and townships. That's the part where, in this whole planning procedure, I think is important too, to have that understanding with them that unless they're going to let us know that, and I'll just use the city of Royalton as an example only here in this, that unless they say, no, we have our model, we have our plan, we have our contract drawn up, and we have our people to administrate this, we're gonna do it on our own. But unless that takes place, we should probably reach out to these entities and say, this is what we're doing, this is what our focus is, our mission is, and if you would like, we will do this in that manner for your people.
Commissioner Wincher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, this is gonna be difficult. Let's use City of Royalton. If City of Royalton, there's a business that applies for the loan, okay, but they didn't get it yet because they got this money. Now, what do? I'm the business here, okay. It's asked me, did I get any funds yet? Well, I didn't get any funds, but then they apply through the county because again, the whole cities are out, they all pay taxes to the county. We all know that. So that's a question probably impossible to answer. So now we gave that business money from our dollar amount. Well, then the city looks at, 2 days later, they got money. I mean, there's gonna be some challenges here to do this. To be fair, well, nothing's as fair as you can do when it comes to government. But my thinking is, you're gonna do the vetting, okay? So if Business A from the city of Little Falls got X amount of dollars, they may have gobbled up, I'm not for sure if they had a ceiling on that, I think they did, right?
It was
$5,000. So if they took the whole 5,000, now, but they had $15,000 worth of bills that they submitted. My guess is most of that 5,000 is loss of revenue, that have nothing to do with that. So now they can probably come back, and my question is, it says bills for expenses. Do you need to show my utility bill from December that was $100, and now I have to do it for $250, so I have to do the comparisons? I mean, I don't even envy what you guys have to do there, because it's gonna be so difficult. Or me, I'm just gonna send you my 3 utility bills for February, March, and April, and hey, I want that money. It's gonna, I don't even like to go there. It's so frustrating.
Commissioner Mayor, Commissioner Wincher, and let me throw another question at you, okay? Use Royalton as an example. Royalton has their own fund, okay? And so they're gonna go to their businesses and they're going to give them whatever grants they wanna give them out of that money. Can the business then come back to the county fund here and double dip? I mean, it's the same thing as with the city of Little Falls.
That's what my concern is.
I would say you could double dip as long as it didn't go over your expenses. You know what I mean? If I had $10,000 worth of expenses for those 3 months or whatever, and I got 5 from somebody else, that'll be on this application, and we'll see the bills for the other $5,000. If it's legit, it's probably legit if you're not out of money.
How many businesses are there in Morrison County?
I,
know?
I can't be sure, but I can tell you, we made 62 loans, and just in the city of Little Falls.
A part of that was a loan, remember that, so they're paying that back, and then if they pay so many, then it's,
Right.
Mr. Chair, that wasn't part of this group of funding.
No.
No.
No,
I
I
think-
know, I just,
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
if we wanna give a little bit to everyone, there ain't gonna be nothing really to give to the ones that really were affected by this. Cause there's some businesses that profited more because of the COVID-19, and there's some that, you know, and some people say differently, but restaurants and liquor stores, I mean, they're tough to make a business when it's busy, and they were closed for months.
Hairdressers too.
There you go, another one, perfect example. Hairdressers, they couldn't even go in their stores.
Mr.
So I think those are, I mean, to me, I think we should concentrate on those that were, and I know there's because this person was out, and this, I know it's a never-ending battle, but I believe, is in your mind, does this answer those questions to those people like that?
Well, you know, you go back again to, did you get any funding?
Yeah.
How has it affected your business? You know, what I've seen on some is business closed equals no money.
Mhm.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
that's their,
Yeah,
you know, so, yeah.
okay. Thank you, Carol.
Mr.
Yeah.
Chair, I can maybe wrap up a little bit with some changes that, based upon what you guys have talked about, might be incorporated. One, I don't think we have a size of business. I've seen a lot be concentrating on small businesses, so maybe number of employees or something along those lines.
50 or less it had on there somewhere.
Yeah, it was 50 or less.
Did it? Okay, sorry, then I missed that. But 50 or less, so that's small business. I think instead of having an ongoing meeting with RDFA to decide on disbursement, it sounds more like we need to see all of them and then be able to vet those accordingly, because I'm hearing that it's going to depend upon how many apps we get, and then from there, who maybe gets what. So I'm kind of thinking it might be more of an apps are due at a certain time period, and then we decide on disbursement, because if we do it weekly, it's gonna be a first come, first serve until the funding's out. And I'm hearing that might not be as I don't know what you guys wanna see. So, that would be a change in a discussion and process we might wanna consider.
I would ask you then, how long do you wanna hold the apps before you make a decision? You know, do you wanna do it once a month? Do you wanna hold it and have the RDFA meet and approve them all
That's what I was
in October?
thinking, as a month, like maybe September's used as the application period, and then come October, we decide, and then we disperse from there. Otherwise, you will get just some at a time, and then you won't know, well, what's gonna come in next week, or whatever it might be. And I'm hearing that that's kind of a theme that I've heard from a few of you guys about that. And then also, I think specific on expenses, on how government, or how the governor's orders impacted your businesses. We can, when we say be specific, we can maybe elaborate on what specific means when it comes to how did the governor's orders during the pandemic impact your business or your business expenses as a result of that, or something along those lines. Like a hairdresser, I agree.
I like it.
Totally big deal, but how many more additional expenses are going to be there as a result of that? That's a revenue replacement thing. I don't know if there's, we'll have to kind of see if that's an opportunity here to be able to fund, but those are a couple changes I'm hearing that might be worthwhile exploring.
If I may, Mr. Chair, as far as using this grant application, maybe Deb can help me, could we use this money to put it out there that, hey, this money's available to advertise on the radio or what, you know?
Sure we
Because
can.
I'm hoping we can, because at least it gets it out there so people aren't, well, I never knew about this. So, I mean, we could probably spend X amount of dollars just advertising.
Yep, Mr. Chair, that would be the intent once we get a solid application. Also the intent to work with townships. Once we get here's a program that we're running from county government level. Number one, make sure you're accepting these dollars. Number two, here's how you accept the dollars. And then here's some ideas on different types of eligible expenses, or make sure you're asking questions on that. If not, we have a business assistance program that certainly could be something you participate in if you so choose. And here's the format of that business assistant program. But all of that would get out between now and when we have this application open, so we can know what availability there is for
When do we have
funding.
to have this money dispersed by December 1st?
At the end of the year.
November, we have to.
November, I think.
Mr. Chair, if I can go back to addressing something here, Carol had drew the scenario that if, using Royalton as the example, that if they chose to run this program and set up their own management or administration of this program, could those businesses then double dip and come in and apply it in the county? And I'm going to say I'm gonna take a strong opposition to that idea because of this scenario. If they chose not to administer that program, that money would come back to the county and be a part of our pool, correct? Or am I not, or because we said that
The city's money won't.
Mr. Chair,
Well-
yes. If the city doesn't spend it, it would come back, but they have a whole slew of opportunity to spend it on different things or to use it to reimburse themselves for expenses like we do. So,
yes, and I realize that, but any revenue that they don't utilize for expenses and whatever would come back to the county, correct?
Mr. Chair, I think
Same with townships out there.
Steve's gonna answer your question, I think.
at the meeting that Carol and I were at, we were pretty adamant about, talking to them about, figure out how to spend this money to improve upon things like we had to here on how we did business. Did they have to do business differently, and were there expenses involved in that? Communication. And we told them that if you can't spend your money, or you don't think you can, apply for the money, give it back to us, and it would go into this loan program. And there was every city there but the city of Little Falls, I believe, that was eligible for money were there. And so the cities got that message. Now, there's no townships there, but the cities did get that message that day, because we were pretty adamant
And
that,
Steve told them flat out, we get the money, we're putting into this business assistance program to help businesses, so. The one thing I do want to clarify with you, when you talk about businesses, they say, and this is the state's language, and I put it in here, that you can't use it for home-based businesses except daycares. So, the woman that's out there that has the hair salon in her home, out on the farm, doesn't work.
But if we have a gentleman and his sons run a wood manufacturing business at their residence
That
would be different.
would be different.
Or they have a welding business, in a shop on their farm.
That's different.
Okay.
If they got shut down.
Yes, if they got shut down, yeah.
Or they, but that's the part of this though too, that gets a little hairy here, is that we're looking at using funds that people, that have, to reimburse people for costs that were incurred because of the governor's actions. Because a business is shut down, then that becomes a loss of revenue. And so separating those two, that's a loss of revenue, not an increased expense. That's that part where I'm going back to that again.
They still have their taxes, their light bills, their gas bills, their
But we,
insurance policies, and they still gotta pay them every month.
Yep.
Mortgages,
those are expenses.
you know.
So again, Mr. Chair, I know we wanna move on.
Yeah, we gotta.
But again, these expenses, so if I just send in my utility bills, that could be, because again, they might, well, you know what, my business was shut down, but you know what, I still paid, I wasn't getting revenue, and again, we can't go there. Can they just send their utility bills in, and would that be good enough?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mike?
Well, I don't wanna throw a big other wrench in this, but I've had some of the organizations like the Trail Association, the Ball Diamonds that got pull tab money, that pull tabs didn't come in, if they would qualify at all for any money.
Mr. Chair, this is a business assistance program and it's a for-profit.
So zero.
We can have another discussion on nonprofit eligibility when it comes to what the non-10% portion of this funding could fund.
One thing I think we do need to do is determine, and I know you said that your department heads are working together to determine what the county has invested in this pandemic. And then we can move from there with the amount of dollar amount we're willing to grant.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would suggest you start at a minimum of the 10% and start with that for now, because that's what was kind of originally discussed when the legislature developed this pot of funding. Go there. We can always expand on that with what we learn as we learn more in the coming months about what other opportunities there are, both internally and externally, to help businesses. And that's my suggestion. I think that's what we were kind of operating under for now, which is approximately a little over $400,000 to work with this program. The other thing is are you okay with that max 5,000 for now? Again, addressing that differently if we see different, applications coming in or something along those lines with the numbers.
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, if I may, I think we have to leave that kind of open because we don't know what, I know that tomorrow you're gonna have a department head meeting that's gonna ask a lot of these same questions. And if at the end of the day, that funding is utilized or could be within, that $5,000 figure would have to change to another number. I think we have to keep loose.
What Deb said is, we're gonna start with the 10% of the 4 million.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Dedicated just for the businesses, so that'd be 400,000.
Yep, that takes it off the top right away
Yep.
without.
So, Mr. Chair, are you looking for us to take any action on this? Can we continue to review what Carol has brought forward that we have on the screen here and ask questions and cultivate this a little bit? Or are you, Deb, you're asking the question on the $5,000. Do we have to have that established here now, or what kind of flexibility do we have on this, and how much dialogue can we have on this before we have to sign off?
And Mr. Chair, so the reason that I'd like to see this as finalized as possible, the sooner than later, is because I'd like to communicate it out with the townships and the cities and just say, this is gonna be the program that we're going to run at the county. Your funding eligibility, number one, accept it. Number two, do what you can to work on covering your costs. And then number three, if you have extra costs, this is the program we're gonna run and you can participate in that, or those fundings can participate in that. If we run a application time period like I was talking about, my thought is, and this is just me brainstorming too, September be that application time period, October be the decision about awards. And so we have, what is it now, July,
Mid-July.
mid-July, take the next couple of weeks to finalize this process. We'll talk about it again a couple of times, to kind of say, okay, based upon the discussion we had today, here's some changes.
August 1st, let's
on that.
get this going.
And get it starting to communicate out in August, to be able to take applications in September and then award in October. Sound like a reasonable time period? As I'm listening to the discussion today, I think that might be where we could.
I'm more interested in Carol's response to to that dialogue. How comfortable are you with that? We're done, because we're asking you to take on a significant amount of work, with this, and with, I know the limit of staff there, so.
It's me.
Yeah, and so,
Well, if you do it, it would probably be easier if you did it like Deb said.
yes.
Here is your time frame. September 1st to September 30th, October 1st or whatever, we meet, we review them and approve them with the goal to have the money out the door by October 30th, but we're gonna have to do a massive type of a PR campaign, and, all those businesses in your district, if you see them, or, door knock them and say, here's a program,
I think the $5,000 is a good number.
okay.
Well, I guess that's where my question comes in. Why can't we decide something here? We got 400,000 we're talking. If we talk $5,000 max, and now you put the details together. Because we got 2 weeks before we really meet again as a board like this, so why not try to, those are the.
I'm fine with that, if you're fine with that. I didn't want to limit you without.
Again, I like it as I like it as a minimum. Here's the other, not that we can sit and hash this out all day, because we have other people here, but let's say we have 400,000 and we're gonna have a $5,000 minimum, and we only get, applications that would utilize $250,000, can we go back then and say, we have, here's all the applications, but there's $150,000 left on the table, can we increase the number from 5,000 to 8,000 to utilize that money, so we ain't sending it back to?
Carol had 62 applications, right, from the city?
City of Little
That's
Falls.
310,000 right there, just the city of Little Falls.
And again, Mr. Chair, if you look at the 5,000, that's 80, if everybody would max
all it
out,
is.
that's only 80 businesses.
Yeah.
So I think that's a little too high, and then I wanna clarify, you're saying minimum or maximum of 5,000?
Maximum of
Okay.
5 is what
Right,
Carol has
okay.
written here.
Yeah.
I don't know what Greg was thinking, minimum.
Right,
Well, based on what can you show me for expenses? I mean,
Yeah.
maybe you can come in for 5, but you only got 2,500 worth of expenses. Well,
Exactly.
then
And I
that's
think
what you
that'll
would
be
get.
a lot of what we're talking about, these small businesses. I think we'll be talking a lot more in that $2,000 range.
and they're not guaranteed the 5,000.
No, it's just a maximum amount.
They have to
I'm
prove-
glad we have 2 more weeks to chew on this. This is like a giant bale of hay for a really small calf, so.
That's a good one.
Hope it
That's a
has
heck
good
of an
protein value.
All right.
Yeah.
Stay up at night thinking.
Thanks for the work you're doing, Carol.
Thank you.
All right.
Really
Till next
appreciate it.
time.
Yep.
And the businesses do too, I'm sure.
Now, and just another thing, if you do have money left over, I think you can grant it to food shelves or something
Very good.
like that,
Well, we heard 2 very good organizations this morning that
Yeah,
maybe we
so
could help
maybe
out.
that's if you have left over,
Plus, I think the ones Mike were talking about as well, those
The nonprofits.
Yeah.
nonprofits, I think that is another avenue if we have money left over to look at.
Because their expenses have gone up.
And the fundraising capabilities for them has
Yeah.
tremendously reduced. And the part of the Wednesday call, there's 2 of them actually. One's with the Initiative Foundation. In their region, when it comes to nonprofit funding, I'm very curious to listen to that. And then also statewide administrators and what the state is doing, or across the state, what others are doing, just so we get some ideas and stuff. So there's more information to come as we look at it. All right.
Changing.
Do you have anything
Yes.
else, Deb?
Yep.
Thank you so much, Carol.
Steve, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we need to go through schedules, but just wanted to welcome our guests. I'm very excited. Clearly, we're running a little behind schedule, but we'll get there. we'll wrap up here, running at the tail end of the board meeting that we do every other week. So we'll talk a little bit about Morrison County, what's happening, but right now, the board, I'll turn it over and go through your calendars so we can report.
Yes, I do.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I'll need your schedules from Monday, July 20th to August 1st.
Jeffrey, would you like to start?
Why not?
Take care of most of us.
Mr. Chair, I'll do my best.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
Starting on the 21st at 8:30 in the morning, there's a planning meeting that's scheduled. On the 23rd at 12:30, I've got a State Emergency Communications Board meeting. It's in St. Paul, however, that has been a video conference, and I would anticipate it to continue to be. On the 27th of July, at 9 o'clock in the morning is when the Regional Leadership Emergency Communications Group meets in St. Cloud at the DOT. Because of COVID, and because this is a group that gets together, I think, 4 times a year, they're gonna have 2 virtual meetings. One's gonna be from 9 to 11, and one will be from 7 PM till 9 PM. That's the Regional Leadership Group from the State Emergency Communications Board. I attend that. I'll probably attend the morning meeting virtually. On the 28th, at 9 o'clock in the morning, there's a county board meeting. On the 29th, at 11 o'clock in the morning, Central Minnesota Emergency Services Board meets. And at 1 o'clock that same afternoon, the full board meets. That generally is held in St. Cloud at the City Hall. On the 31st, at 10 o'clock in the morning, the EMS Joint Powers Board meets. That typically is at the Stearns County Service Center. I do not know where that meeting is gonna meet. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Winter?
All right, above that, on the 20th, there's a Little Falls Township I'll be at 6:30 at the Township Hall to do with the flooding out in that area. On the 21st, I have a Great River Regional Library meeting. That's gonna be webinar, whatever they call it. That's at 5:30. On the 23rd, another webinar for Tri-County TCC at 5:30 is a webinar.
Excuse me, Mr. Richard, what time is it?
Which one are you talking?
The TCC.
That's at 5:30 on Thursday, the 23rd. On the 24th, it'll be the first time in about 4 months that we'll have a soil and water here at 8 o'clock in the morning here at the courthouse. So that's kind of nice that we're gonna be going out. So on the 24th, Friday, and then the rest is covered. Thank you.
Did anybody mention Planning Commission on the 27th?
They did not, but it is on my calendar.
It's at 7 PM.
7 o'clock.
Mine says Microsoft Teams meeting, so I assume,
They're switching,
Yeah.
they're switching
be online.
carriers.
So it's another virtual team meeting.
yes. And then 28th, I have a 1 o'clock HRA. Michael?
21st, I got Community Development at 12:15, and on the 24th, Mississippi Headwaters. Just to explain to you folks out there, we all have our board meetings and the stuff, and then we all have individual meetings that we go to, so we're not all going to all of these, just so you understand it.
Assignments.
Yep.
Commissioner Blaine?
Mr. Chair, on Thursday, July 23rd, I have an executive board meeting for Region 5 at 10 a.m. At the Region 5 office. And that evening at 6 p.m., the full Region 5 Development Commission board meets. And that is all.
Very good. Anything else?
Mr. Chair, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Jelinski, second by Commissioner Winchester to adjourn. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Meeting adjourned.
All right, so we're gonna take just a minute to